Hey, what's up, and welcome back to Full Academy. In our last episode, we talked about the different income sources and the importance of having strategies to develop your income streams. In this episode, I'm going to share the results of a player survey that I conducted. In this survey, I asked players of different skill, development, and ranking levels to describe and quantify where they get their income from. The purpose of doing this wasn't necessarily to make judgments about who does it best, but just to see what insights I could glean from the data and the results. Before we begin, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of the players that helped me with this survey, and this episode is dedicated to you. These profiles were selected to show a reasonably diverse range of players in terms of styles, values, guilds, strategies, and capabilities. Definitely not exhaustive, so I'm not saying that I've captured every type of profile in existence. The purpose of this is really just to talk about income mixes with more specific examples. Let's first look at the players with daily incomes less than 1,000 Forge points. What we see from several of these players is a heavy dependence on city collections, which, as I mentioned earlier, is an income source that tends to be slower to develop than fighting or investment income. But we also see that two of the players with less developed cities and lower income and lower city collection incomes, here I'm talking about player C and player D, they were able to boost up their income to higher levels by tapping into other income sources. In fact, player D is the youngest player here, but was able to achieve one of the highest overall incomes. The next slide shows the next tier, the 1,000 to 2,000 Forge points per day tier. It's in this range where we see city collections alone start to really reach their limit. We see that a 6-year player like player G is able to get 1,200 or so Forge points a day, mostly from city collections. And I've also seen some players on Facebook claim to be able to get 1,500 to 1,700 per day from their city collections. But getting much higher will be difficult and will take a good amount of time to develop. Here I'm talking about getting higher than 1,200 Forge points a day. But we also see here that far younger players are able to get up into this 1,000 to 2,000 Forge point per day range by adding some significant fighting and investment income to their mix. We also see that some players that sort of made a conscious decision not to maximize their income and are choosing to instead prioritize certain aspects of the game that they feel are more enjoyable. Here I'm talking about players I and J, who are both top 30 players in their world and fierce fighters. They certainly have the art level needed to bring in more GB investment income. So they have at least some of the capability needed to draw a nice income from that source. But it's not something that really interests them from a playing style standpoint. In the final tier, you generally see players that draw the majority of their income from fighting and investing. And for some of these, you can really start to see how lucrative investment income can really be. I mentioned this earlier, but some time has passed since I conducted this survey about 3 months ago. And during that time, I decided to de-emphasize GBG income and mainly participate in GBG to fight high attrition sectors and do races. So my fighting income has fallen by about 70 to 80%. But I have more than made up for that by really working on developing a solid sniping list. I got a sniping partner, moved up in age to access better hoods for sniping, and I leveled my arc up to close to 150, level 150. So now my income profile looks a lot more like player N. So that's just another example of how income mixes can be heavily influenced by playing style. And by having the flexibility to do that by developing other capabilities. In my case, developing my forge point bank as well as my arc level, raising my arc level. So let's go over some of the themes from this survey and see what insights we can draw from it that we can use when thinking about our own games. The first takeaway is that it's important to recognize that some decisions may actually limit your income. Take player A, for example, who, as you can see, mainly gets their income from city collections. A big reason for this is that the player does not snipe and their guild is a relatively weak Diamond League guild that is often being pinned by much stronger guilds. Now, player A did express a desire to grow their city faster, but insisted that a guild change was out of the question and that they were ethically opposed to sniping or plundering. And while we can admire player A's dedication to their guild and staying true to their values, it's important to recognize that these are conscious choices and decisions that will limit income and slow down city growth. And whether you agree or not with player A's positions, it's pretty clear to me that they could have made a lot more forge points if they didn't impose these income limiting decisions. I'm showing player D and myself here as a comparison because player D used snipes, plundering, and fighting in GBG in a stronger guild to earn 3 times the income of player A in less than half the time played in the game. And I've been playing the game about the same amount of time as player A, and at the time of the survey, I had a comparable amount of city collection income, but a much higher overall income because I was drawing significant income from GBG and from investments. The next key takeaway is that work works. Effort matters. As I mentioned earlier, one of the best things about city collection income is that it's quick and easy. If you line things up well, you might be able to log in once a day, collect from your buildings, drop them onto the GB of your choice, and then log out. It could take less than a minute. But getting a significant number of forge points from fighting and investing in GBs will be different. If you want to make 1,000 forge points a day in GBG, you're probably going to need to get at least 500 or so fights. And yes, buildings like the HC might help to reduce that number, but if you're going to get more technical, then you need to also factor in that GBG happens only 11 out of every 14 days. So you'll have to factor that into your daily forge point totals or average. Similarly, investing might sound easy, but to do it really well takes time in terms of constantly maintaining your snipe lists, browsing through your friends and hood lists, taking spots on guild and external 1.9 threads, and then monitoring when great buildings flip, and so on. But still, if you're looking to boost up your income well beyond what you make from city collections, then these more active and time-intensive sources of income can provide that. And that's a segue to our next takeaway, which is that multiple income streams are generally needed to access the higher income tiers, or at least to break into them, and that younger players can access these higher tiers sooner by really working to develop these different income streams. Next, and as with so many things in this game, context and situation really matter. As I mentioned earlier, player A is in a relatively weak Diamond League guild. That's going to limit the number of opportunities that they're going to get in GBG. In contrast, player F is in a stronger GBG guild and will have more opportunities for fights and negotiations. Now, I'm not suggesting that the difference between player A and player F is simply opportunities for fights, because there are other differences. But still, it's an important difference. At the same time, I don't want to give the impression that if you want fights, all you need to do is join a strong guild. Because, sometimes it may be really difficult to get fights if your guild is too strong. So in the case of player F, yes, this player is in a really strong GBG guild that is capable of more than most guilds controlling its own destiny and not getting pinned to its base. But at the same time, player F is someone who shows up for fights 4 to 5 rounds a day, even though sectors get filled up really quickly. I don't have it here on this slide, but there are players who do join guilds that are actually too strong for given their developmental level, and they do struggle to get fights. In that case, those players might be better served in finding a guild that's a little bit weaker, where their sectors don't fill up as quickly, and they would be able to get more fights per round end. The players shown here are in well-developed cities and have reached a point where they can choose which aspects of the game they want to concentrate on. For example, player Q has an attack boost of over 2200%, but has a relatively modest fighting income because they focus on war seasons and races rather than farming. Still, they continue to grow their city through sniping and city collections. Players I, J, and L prefer to focus on the fighting aspect of the game instead of trying to get income from snipes, even though they all have arcs well above level 125. Same thing with player P, who does some sniping, but really spends a lot of their time fighting. And finally, there are some very experienced players that have reached a point in their FOE career where they're semi-retired, meaning that they log in once a day for a short time, collect, maybe fight a little, and then log off. And while their collection income is quite good, they are basically living off of a fixed income. So that brings us to the end of this episode. I hope that you found it interesting and that it was useful to go over some examples of how actual players get their income. And then now we can use those examples to gain some insight into how to grow your own income into the upper tiers and how income strategies can be influenced by things like strategy, gameplay, and values. In our next episode, I'm going to cover the basics of great building investments and some of the things that you'll need to think about to make better decisions. Thank you, and please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel.